So we discussed, so the maybe example we see form like a beautiful lady, and that means the eye, look at the lady, there's this contact, and then so eye consciousness arises. Okay, so the perception differentiate, know that this is the lady, recognize that this is the lady, and then then the then the volitional formation. No, then the feeling of pleasant feeling arises. Like the lady, like to look more, and then look more as in the sankhara, the volitional formation comes in. Want to look more at the lady. It's more complicated than that, but this is just a simple illustration. And so when we meditate, we see the arising and passing away of the aggregates, and we also start to see the if we contemplate, we see the causes and condition that is seeing the lady. That's what leads to all this, the others to arise, and we also discussed that we can change perception, because perception is storage of memory and of information. So by always aware, mindful, and reflecting on the three characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta, and then with the background information, the next time when you contemplate or when you see, immediately that information will come forward, and then you may not react and like to see beautiful ladies anymore. You may. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Very good. Any more interesting sharings? Again, in this section, not only do we identify the khandhas, but we also try to look at how they arise and how they pass away. Right? Again, this becomes redundant. The refrain becomes redundant because the observation of the arising and passing away is already mentioned in the main text. Now, these five aggregates is a scheme, one of the schemes of subjective experience that the Buddha used as a way to contemplate. In terms, contemplate anicca, dukkha, anatta, and conditionality. And these five aggregates are arranged in order of subtlety. So the first aggregate of form is something gross, and then it goes to feeling is less gross, and it comes to sanya, it's more obvious. That is is a bit subtle, and then it comes to sankhara, and then vijnana is the most subtle. And this actually occurs in the course of a meditation. You can notice these aggregates as you go deeper into meditation, as your mind becomes more and more composed, as your samadhi becomes deeper. Form here refers not only to visible forms. Forms here refers to whatever that you can perceive through your five senses. Colors, sounds, smells, tastes, as well as tactile objects. Some of these have already been covered under Kayanupasana, right? Particularly tactile objects. And visual object in the sense of the 31 parts of the body, as well as the 9 corpses. Sanya is perception. Vedana means feelings, and this has already been covered under Vedananupassana. They can be classified as 2 to 108. Yeah, that's in one sutta, in Vedana Sangyutta, the Buddha talked about how he could classify Vedana from 2 to 108. 2 is either Sukha or Dukkha, right? Comfortable or uncomfortable. Then where does Upekkha or neutrality come in? When it's neutral, then it's comfortable, right? It's not uncomfortable. So that's how he classifies it. And then if you classify it according to whether it's born out of contact with the eye or contact with the ear and so forth, so you have different permutations and you can come out to 108 types of feelings. But actually feelings in the course of meditation, for example, when you sit to meditate, usually we will ask you to bring your attention back to your body, right? And there's something easy to ground yourself. And after some time, when you sit, then you begin to get aches and pains, and there's Vedana coming in. And in the course of a meditation also, as you sit, you will have memories popping into your head, particularly all those things that you did early this morning, or other things that are stuck in your consciousness, some obsessive thoughts, some unsettled business, then they will pop up. So that's sanya. Sanya, from my understanding, is closely related to sati in the sense that both of them are connected with past objects, right? Both of them are also connected with memory. I would say that sanya is spontaneous memory, whereas sati is willful memory. Sanya is something which arises spontaneously, although there are causes and conditions behind it. When you look at somebody, automatically you recognize that person. When you look at an item, if you've seen it before, automatically you recognize it. But if you look at someone and then you cannot recognize that person, then you will scratch your head and say, well, I've seen this guy somewhere before. Well, where could it be? Then you start to intentionally recall where you saw him, and that's sati. There's intentional memory, willful memory. And sati comes under sankharas. Right? Sankharas are anything that has to do with volition. And then finally we have vijnana, consciousness. Consciousness is something quite basic. One would say it's just bare cognition. For example, eye consciousness can only be aware or be conscious of colors. Ear consciousness can only be conscious of sounds. And nose consciousness can only be conscious of smells, and tongue consciousness can only be conscious of tastes. Then body consciousness can only be conscious of tactile objects. The 4 great elements, for example. Okay, then the mind consciousness is smarter, of course, like we said yesterday. The mind or mano is the refuge of the 5 senses, because the 5 senses cannot coordinate with one another. They just mind their own business, they do their own thing, and it's only the mind consciousness that's able to receive information, arrested information relayed by the 5 senses. And then again, mind consciousness or mano works well when there is enough data behind it. There is enough background information for it to operate. It's very much like the computer. A computer, when you key in the data, it is just raw data. You must have the program there to be able to interpret the data and to do the work. So where does this data come in? The data comes in through mostly sanya, right? And sanya, of course, is a conditioned phenomenon. It comes about through sankharas. Right? For example, when you listen to me, part of the function of sati is to remember. Remember means right now also you remember. Just immediately after you listen to me and your mind interprets the sound and you understand the meaning, then you try my sati will try to remember it. Right? Next time, if it is well remembered, sanya will arise. Okay. Now sanya has this dual function of registering what it cognizes, and also to recognize what it had cognized before. So it's recognition. Right? So that's how it is. And sometimes our recognition, so-called recognition, may be faulty because the cognition wasn't correct in the first place. That's why you have wrong perceptions. And based on your wrong perceptions, if you jump to conclusions, then you could cause a lot of suffering to yourself and to other people. Right? So that's what these 5 aggregates are. And so the job of the yogi is to identify them when they arise. Oh, this is rupa, this is rupa, and you could know all about rupa. What is rupa like? Right? And this is vedana. How does vedana feel like? How is it like in experience? This is sanya. What is the difference between sanya and sati? Can you really see the difference when it arises? So the yogi's job is to identify them, number one. And secondly, once you've identified them, you have to try to look at the cause. What is the cause for its arising? Okay? Normally, this is done when the mind has settled down. If you are in perennial composure, which means to say that if you are mindful the whole day, keeping watch of your mind, making sure that your mind does not get involved in too many discursive and unrelated thoughts, then you might be able to keep track of the 5 aggregates as and when they arise in your daily life. When you talk about 5 aggregates, they are just aggregates, they are just elements of subjective experience. There's no I, no mind, no self there. Right? If you are able to identify form, and then you say that there's me or mine, or there's he or her, then that's no longer an aggregate. It becomes a concept, and it's something perceiving it from a wrong point of view. So it's not easy actually to observe the 5 aggregates in your daily life, because in your daily life we are all involved in a world of concepts, of conventional relationship with one another, which is based on concepts. So usually meditators would start off some form of meditation and settle their mind until their mind becomes very composed. And sometimes when meditation deepens until awareness of the senses, of the 5 senses, recedes to the background. I think yesterday Brother Lao Ting Fu talks about the mind withdrawing from the senses, and then the senses recede to the background, and sounds become very far away. Sensations also become very subtle and unnoticeable. So you might find yourself like in a big empty space with a dot, of softness here, and a touch of wind there, and maybe a little sound here and there. So like there's nothing there, There's just emptiness there. At this point of time, most yogis are lost because they are so used to watching gross objects, like the breath, for example, right? And watching, sitting, touching, all these gross physical objects. And when these gross physical objects recede to the background, and then there's nothing for you to look at, then you're like, groping in the dark, not knowing what to do. So what usually happens is that they will either fall asleep, or they get absorbed into the peace and tranquility, and so they cannot do anything else. They cannot observe the arising and passing of phenomena because it's so subtle. So what needs to be done at such a time is to look back at the four aggregates, because they're so used to looking at the rupa, the gross aggregate. They're not used to looking at the four aggregates. They don't know how to go about doing it. So that's the time when you have to look at that feeling, how do you feel, how is it like at that point of time, what is the perception. Now you see, perception is also happening in the time because you recognize that objects are becoming so subtle you cannot locate them, right? And there's nothing in inverted commas worth noting, worth being aware of. But actually there are a lot of things happening in the mind in the four aggregates. It's just that the rupa has receded to the background. But if you direct your mind through good background information like what I'm giving you now, then you should try to look at the four aggregates. Right? Look at feeling. Feeling is very fundamental. Probably you feel nice, and maybe equanimous. And then look at sanya. Is sanya able to recognize what's happening, recognize the feeling, for example, recognize that experience, right? And then there is sankhara. There's sankhara here. There is this volition, this intention to want to look for something to see, to note, to observe. All right? And then there is vijnana, which is the sense of knowing. Right? Although objects become so subtle and seem to be not worthy of or unable to be noted in detail, there is still this sense of knowing. So that is consciousness itself. So what you're supposed to do is to look at these four aggregates, identify these four aggregates, and look at them in terms of anicca, dukkha, anatta. Right?